When I first started the business as a young man at age 26, my expectations were that I just needed to work. I had really no idea where this was going, but I wanted to fly airplanes, and I wanted to be in the business of flying airplanes, but had absolutely no expectations of what that would be like. It was a strange time.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
It was the very beginning, and I was scared, basically as scared as I could be. When I first started, there were really no employees but me. It was me doing everything. I wrote the books to get the certificate from the FAA. I did the check rides, I did the first flights. Really didn't have any employees. It was about a year, possibly a year and a half after I began the business that I actually hired my first pilot. But no employees at that particular time. I was pretty much on my own. The 70s were an interesting time, and as the company really began, the first really big break that I got was that we signed a contract with the Purolator Courier Company, and that gave us some stability. That gave us a position of being, of having regular work, regular scheduled work. We're really a charter company, and so with just without any real stability, it made it very, very difficult. In those early years, fuel was always an issue. There was a little bit of fuel issue in the middle toward the late 70s. And so we built the business around the contract business. We did flying for Purolator Courier, and we started doing flying for other companies. But the business was really built around the stability of having a contract with a large major carrier and then doing charter work on the side. As we got into the late 70s, we began from just flying little airplanes and piston airplanes. We got into our first jets, and that was a really exciting time as well. We did passenger charters out to the Bahamas. We did charters all over the Western Hemisphere, actually, from as far north as Canada and Alaska, all the way down south into Ecuador and deep South America, Brazil, places like that. The business continued to grow through the end of the 70s. In the late 70s, early 80s, we really expanded the business into much more of a jet fleet as opposed to a small piston engine airplane fleet. But again, the basic of all that business was really centered around our contract work. Well, there was a certain second decade of the business from 1984 through, say, 1994, that next 10 years. Very interesting time. At that point in time, I had become much more confident in what we were doing. I was fairly certain about our direction. We were at a time when the Civil Aeronautics Board was sunsetting. Very interesting time where it made it easy for us to become a larger carrier and be able to operate larger aircraft. And so in 1985, we actually acquired our first Boeing 727. So that second decade was really a time of growing in the larger airplane business. We had a lot more employees at that point. We expanded our contract business, and it was also our first try into the common carriage business. Actually began trying to do common carriage along the west coast of the United States between Alaska and Houston, going all the way through Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle on the way. We began that service, and then that service, we had to discontinue that service in 1990 at the beginning of the first Gulf War because of fuel prices. Fuel prices really went crazy during that period of time. And we saw fuel go from 50 or 60 cents a gallon to $1.50 in like 3 weeks. It was incredible. So we had to pull that West Coast common carriage system down in the early 1990s, but by that time we'd already begun doing some common carriage into Latin America, Mexico, and the northern part of the Caribbean Sea. And so we focused more on our common carriage business that as it exists today, as opposed to where it was at that particular point in time. But at the same time, we were continuing to operate airplanes for the overnight carriers, people like FedEx and Burlington Air Express, Emery Worldwide. Those were, again, remained the stability of the business that helped us grow the common carriage business as we know it today. From a digital position, I remember very clearly, and I'll step back into the early part of the 80s, we had just gotten our first computer. Actually, the computer was about the size of I don't know, a small piano. And it really had very, very little memory. And I recall when we first got it that all we were really going to use it for is to keep track of pilot times. We really weren't going to use it too much for the financial part of the business. As a matter of fact, someone made a comment once that basically we ought to drop kick that computer that we had into the ocean. And so by the time we moved into the late 80s and then into the 1990s, we really began to utilize our IT systems. During our West Coast time, where we were expanding common carriage on the West Coast, we developed an in-house computer system, airbill tracking system, that we still use today. We've modified it and modified it and modified it so many times, but it's something we built internally. We own the source code, and so as a result, our computer systems today are amazing, but it really had its roots. We really began with that system in the early 80s, and then by the time we got to the middle 90s, it was pretty useful. We were really able to predict what we were able to do with our customers, keep track of the billing, keep track of the flights, and keep track of our fuel and all those other things. And we got our first 727 in 1985. We bought that airplane for the exclusive use of flying for DHL at that particular point. We began getting additional equipment. I believe we bought our second one in 1990, and by the time we got to 1994, we had a fleet of, if I remember correctly, about 8 or 9 727s. Not all of them did we own. We leased some of them, a couple of them, but by the time we got to the middle 90s, our fleet really consisted of about 8 or 9 727s. Some of those airplanes were the early 100 series, which was a shorter fuselage and could only hold 9 positions. Toward the early 90s, we got the first 200s, and that changed our load factors tremendously. It really made a huge difference because we could add, for the same fuel burn and the same pilot costs and the same operating costs, we were able to carry an additional 10, 12, 15,000 pounds and 3 more positions. So it had a real dramatic effect on the ability of the business to grow in the middle 90s. How have I changed from 1974 to 1994? I'm now in my middle 40s. I've grown up. I am very excited about my business. I am fairly confident in my life, and I'm confident in the business. I'm confident in the knowledge of how to run the business. And so as a person, I've grown. As an aviator, I'm now qualified to fly all the company airplanes, including the 727. And so personally, I'm in a pretty good spot in the early 1990s, by the time I get to the early 1990s, and enjoying what I do. A lot of things. What really changed in the business from 1994 or so, in the middle 90s, to the beginning of 2000, in that time frame, the business went through some very difficult times. It was a difficult point from many different aspects. We were not making enough money in common carriage to make common carriage be our sole source of revenue. It wasn't stable enough. We didn't have enough revenue that was being produced from that business. And at the same time, our contract business was becoming more and more scary and flimsy. It was getting to a place where more and more people were flying for the large carriers such as Burlington Air Express and for some of the other contractors we were working with, Amerijet Worldwide and so forth. So we were in a strange place in that period of time from the middle 1990s to the year 2000. Internet, 1990? You got to be kidding. There was really no internet that we were really very much aware of in the late 1990s and into the early 2000s. We used some of it, but really very little. Our transition for communication was really through satellite communication as opposed to the internet. The internet came in later in the decade in 2000. However, by the late 1990s, we had explored and installed satellite communications between our Fort Lauderdale headquarters and all of our international stations, and had actually leased time on a Mexican satellite that gave us communication, because of the telephone service into the areas that we were flying were really very poor. So for Amerijet, we began our communications process, which today the internet does for us, but we began that in the late 1990s, and it made our communications really very elaborate, if you will. Give you an example, we opened our station in Georgetown, Guyana, and we also did so in Haiti and other places, but the one that comes to mind is the station we opened in Georgetown, where we had two 40-foot containers that we put a tent between, or a roof, so we could store cargo. One of the containers was used to store freight. The other one was used partially for an office. We put an air conditioning unit in the side of the container, so we'd have an air-conditioned office. And we had a portable generator sitting outside running electrical power, and we had a satellite dish sitting on the roof of the container, so that we could have direct computing and telephone communication directly with this outpost in the middle of South America. And there was no internet. There wasn't even any power. We couldn't even power it. We had to use portable power to make that station work. So that's where we really began. We were ahead of our time in terms of our communication and ability to work with our customers. The internet came along sort of the middle, for us, the middle 2003, 4, 5, where we began to slowly transition away from satellite and more into the kind of communication that we have today, which is largely centered around the internet. From the early 2000, we were flying half of our fleet for Amerijet Worldwide. We had 12 airplanes by this point in time. We had 12 727s. All of them were owned and financed, and we were flying half of that fleet for Amerijet Worldwide doing the postal service, and we were flying the other half of the fleet doing common carriage. And in the late 2000, I got notification from Amerijet that they were terminating our contract to fly the U.S. mail. Amerijet had a contract to fly the U.S. mail, and they subcontracted out to us. The mail contract was terminated, and so Amerijet canceled our contracts that went with it. And as a result, in less than a 60-day period of time, 6 of the 12 airplanes were put out of work. At that same point in time, the aircraft that I couldn't do anything else with the aircraft because the airplanes, there were a lot of other contractors flying for the mail at the same time. And so there was no work for the 6 airplanes that we were flying at that point, and there was no way to sell those 6 airplanes, to get rid of them, to get rid of the debt and the expenses of owning them. And so and this was right at the beginning of 2001, and so by the middle of 2001, we were forced into a position to file for bankruptcy. And we did file for bankruptcy in August of 2001. We were very fortunate at that point in time to be in touch with my current partners, the folks at HIG, and so we were in bankruptcy and out of bankruptcy in less than 90 days, or I think maybe even 120 days. My memory is a little foggy on that one, but we came out of bankruptcy in December of 2001. It was really interesting. It's such a tumultuous time because not only was Amerijet in bankruptcy at that point, but the 9/11 happened at the same time. We had the terrible event of 9/11, and so the world economy was in trouble, Amerijet was in trouble, the whole world was coming apart. It was a pretty stressful time and a very dramatic point in my life, not only my personal life, but also my business life, that short, narrow window of just 1 year, the year 2001, was a very, very difficult year. We survived it, and we made our way through it, but it was a complex time.
Fire and smoke enveloping the very top of the building, and as fire crews were descending on this area.
Where was I on 9/11? This is an interesting story. I was trying to work with our banks during that time. I already said that was the where we had lost our mail contract, and it was actually in South Bend, Indiana, visiting with our bank there in South Bend, and was returning home, was flying home from South Bend. I was flying in a Falcon 20, the corporate jet we were flying at that point, and was climbing out of South Bend on my way back to South Florida when the air traffic controller wouldn't allow me to climb. And I began to hear noise on the other communication on the radio about airplanes diverting out on the east side of the United States.
Another one just hit the building. Wow. Wow, another one hit it hard. Another one just hit the World Trade. The whole building just came apart.
Minnesota Tower, I have an active air defense scramble, F-15s, climbing to flight level 290.
All aircraft on the ground for a national emergency.
And then there was somebody made a comment that said the Pentagon just went up or was just hit.
Boeing 757, the American Airlines jet, landed short of the Pentagon.
And I began to think, my gosh, what's going on? Is somebody bombing the country? And the thought ran through my mind that I would just go straight to South Florida, pick up my family, and continue to Brazil. I actually remember looking off to my left shoulder to see if I could see a mushroom cloud coming off of the east side of the coast of the United States. We were forced to land. That never did get home with that airplane. I was forced to land that airplane down in Hickory, North Carolina, and actually parked the airplane there and drove home. And nobody got to fly anything for at least 2 or 3 days while the country got resolved. But I was physically in the air when the planes flew into the Pentagon building and into the Twin Towers up in New York. It was a tough place to be, and a very tumultuous period in time. From 2004 to 2014, the company has truly changed in a number of different ways, in remarkable different ways. Not only have we expanded our service region, become more mature, got better IT systems and better communication systems and so forth, we've changed our fleet type. We've gone from 727s to now 767s. We began putting our 767s into work in late 2009, 2010, and today we operate largely a fleet of 767 airplanes as opposed to 727 airplanes. We still operate our 72s, but the bulk of our freight today is now carried by our 767 airplanes. From an IT perspective, we have certainly we've come a very, very long ways. We're very data driven today. We understand our customers so much more and our customers' needs. So we understand how the business works. We understand the things that happen to the business when fuel prices change and when markets change. And so from an information technology point of view, we have really expanded and have a clear understanding of what the business is really doing. From a people point of view, we have really truly changed the culture of the company. It's always been my goal from the very beginning to have people that were truly in touch with what is going on with the business, to truly work together, to have the right kind of culture, to have the right kind of values. And we have spent an enormous amount of time in the last decade working on our culture. We have a vision program that Candy G has really helped us develop and grow, and it's made a huge difference in terms of our culture as a company. We have a customer service program today that is second to none, and it's constantly pushed.
So the October Star Award winner is?
Forward to every employee, every single time that there is every relationship is worked. We work on our customer service plan, and so or program. So in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of changes. We've seen huge changes in IT. We've seen changes in our equipment. We've made real strides in our company culture, and we've really improved the success of the business. The business today is doing much better than it's ever done for all those reasons. So in the last 10 years, we've also added 3 more companies to our family of companies. In 2004, we added ITN Worldwide, which is our freight forwarding company. And in 2009, 2010, we added Nations Express, as well as SRX, our Uzbekistan company, airline, our Uzbekistan airline. And all these companies have been added to help round out Amerijet as being a full-fledged service provider for both land and sea and air. And so today we are a small integrator, or what's known as an integrator. We are able to provide service to our customers in all different kinds of modes of transportation, from trucking, from freight forwarding, from ocean services, as well as air services. So it's really helped round out the business in the last 10 years. 40 years later, what have I learned? Life isn't easy. Business is complicated, and that business is always there, but business is really driven by people and their ability to communicate, their ability to react and to learn, because customers or employees are really all the same thing. We're all people. And so probably the biggest lesson I've learned is that in 40 years of being in business is it's really all about people, because it's people that give you businesses, and it's people that also make your business work. I believe Amerijet brings an awful lot of value to the community as a whole. We bring connectivity. We bring people together. We're able to bring their goods, their services to the locations that we serve. We're also able to help them sell their products and help them distribute their products. Nobody can buy anything unless you have money to buy, and you don't have money to buy unless you have something to sell. And so on our southbound services going into Latin America and South America, we take goods and services that they are buying. But on the other hand, on our flights coming north and on our ships coming north, we're bringing back products that they are selling back to the United States or back to North America or the rest of the world that help them get the money to buy the things we're taking south. So we're able to connect the world. The other thing we're able to do is we really believe that we're a part of the communities that we serve. And so in all of our communities, not only here in North America, but also throughout Latin America and South America, we're actively involved with the communities that we serve. In some places we sponsor football teams, we help with relief efforts, we do charitable services to kids all over the world. We're involved in many, many different things. So I believe the company truly is it's a company, it's a community, and it's not just a community here in South Florida, it's a community that stretches clear across the planet.
Come on.
Honey, calm down. I checked the tracking. His birthday gift will be there.
But that's what you told me 10 minutes ago.
They're probably right around the corner.
Right around the corner, huh?
You want me to give them a call?
No. It's okay. I'll call you when it gets here.
Waiting for me, Mr. Sims?
Yeah, my wife keeps calling, worried about the package. I told her to trust Amerijet. I do.
Amerijet, fast, reliable two-door shipping you can count on. Call us today.
The way I see Amerijet's future, Amerijet has a very, very bright future. We're really going places. This is an exciting place to be.